infamous killer Jaime Osuna appeared in court, charged with his second murder after killing his cellmate in a gruesome attack. Sometime in the early hours of March 9th, Jaime Osuna methodically tortured and killed Luis Romero at Corcoran State Prison. Osuna is accused of using a makeshift knife to decapitate and dissect Romero, removing an eye, a finger, and a portion of the man's lung, as well as cutting his spine and removing his eyes. It is believed that the victim was conscious for a portion of the crime. New reports are raising questions about how prison guards missed the hours-long sadistic torture and beheading. Osuna was originally jailed back in 2011 for the brutal murder of Yvette Pina in a motel. He had this to say.
I did sadistically, premeditatedly, deliberately tortured and murdered Yvette Pena. I don't have no sympathy. I'm sadistic. I really don't care. I'll do it and I'll do it again over and over and over.
Please be warned that this true crime case is incredibly disturbing. This man killed his son after his son found his horrifying selfies. You'll feel physically sick by what this man photographed. It was 2012 and Mark Redwine was living in picturesque Colorado. Mark had been divorced twice and had 2 kids with his ex-wife Elaine. The pair were in a custody battle over 13-year-old Dylan Redwine. Dylan had actually expressed to his brother Corey that he felt uncomfortable visiting his dad. It would later be revealed the likely reason for this. Some horrifying images that the brothers found in 2011. On the 18th of November, Mark picked Dylan up from the airport. Dylan had finally agreed to go on a trip to visit his dad. CCTV from the airport showed that the pair were barely interacting. Via text, Dylan agreed that the next day he would go to his friend's house. He was due to arrive there about 6:30 a.m. the next day. His last text was that night at 9:37 p.m. However, Dylan never showed up at his friend's house. His friend sent Dylan a text message at 6:46 a.m. seeing where he was. Unfortunately, he would never get a reply. Mark would later claim that Dylan had left the house and never returned. A huge search of the local area began. Now, within days of the disappearance, one of Mark's ex-wives told police something interesting. Disturbingly, he told her that if he ever had to get rid of a body, he would dispose of it in the mountains. He also apparently said to her that he would kill the kids before he let her have them. Mark was actually interviewed on TV and asked about his ex-wife's allegations against him. He appeared very suspicious to viewers and was talking about Dylan in the past tense. A whole 7 months passed until Dylan's body was tragically found. He was found only around 8 miles from Mark's house, just off an ATV trail. A witness actually came forward and said that they had seen Mark driving alone in the area in April 2013. Mark was very familiar with that area and actually owned an ATV himself. Mark and Dylan's mum also appeared on the Dr. Phil show. Basically, the episode was just them throwing allegations at each other. Interestingly, Mark failed to do a lie detector test. Then a telling discovery was made. In August 2013, police found Dylan's blood and human cadaver smell in Mark's lounge. A cadaver dog also indicated that human remains were present in the washing machine, on Mark's clothes, and in Mark's vehicle. Mark was arrested for second-degree murder and child abuse. So what were these disgusting photographs that the boys had found? The pair had discovered photos of Mark dressed in women's underwear consuming feces out of a nappy. I obviously cannot show these images on TikTok for obvious reasons, but you can find them on Google, but just be very prepared for disgusting images. Dylan and his dad's relationship had been gradually declining, and Dylan had actually asked his brother to send him the images so that Dylan could confront his dad. He had no idea that doing so would be fatal. The prosecution stated that this had triggered rage in Mark. He then killed his own son in the lounge of his house. He was eventually sentenced to 48 years in prison.
Stewie.
Yeah?
It's not your fault.
What?
It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
I know.
The woman you just saw in that video, Sarah Stewart, and her husband Christopher Stewart have been arrested, and they are facing charges after their 6-year-old son died from a Benadryl overdose. So on social media, Sarah seems like the happiest, nicest mom around. She has tons of videos on her page, which is still up by the way, And if you were to look at her page and scroll back a little bit, she would seem completely normal. Well, until she started posting these weird, sad, cryptic posts a few months ago. Posts like this one. Well, as it turns out, on October 30th, 2022, the day before Halloween, the police were called to their home. They claimed at the time that their 6-year-old son had fell off of a recliner, hit his head on a hard floor, and suffered an immediate seizure. That day, their child was transported to the hospital. He survived and held on a little bit longer, but he died later that night. When a search warrant was served on the couple's home, though, they discovered some disturbing things. Apparently, the family and the child were living in filthy conditions, and there had been past child abuse allegations against the parents. An autopsy of their son even showed that there were bruises on his body that were still healing at the time of his death. And the autopsy also revealed something disturbing. Their son hadn't died from falling and hitting his head on the floor. He died from a Benadryl overdose, which, if you know anything about Benadryl, is extremely hard to do. The authorities even said that their son had enough Benadryl in his body to kill a full-grown man. And after their arrest, the parents even said that they would give their son Benadryl if he was being hyperactive. It's just crazy to go on her page and see the post that she made before she was arrested. It's a crazy, crazy story. And hopefully there are some serious sentences handed out here. I know Sarah has been charged with homicide. Her husband has been charged with child neglect, but this is just a tragic story for everybody involved.
Oh my god, what the hell is this? What the fuck? Where did she come from? Okay, that is creepy. That is so creepy. Brandon's gonna freak out. Do I go back and look for him? What the hell? Where did she come from? This is something I'm freaking out. We were literally so far from anything, guys. 45 minutes that way, on a bike, 30 minutes from this prison. What was that? What? That girl. Was that not creepy?
Way down there where I had my blanket going. Pushing down there.
Staring.
Like running at me.
She did?
Yeah, I was like throwing back to the river.
What? She was just like, kind of like staring at me. Dude, that was weird.
I'm a savage! Oh! I'm a savage! Whatever I want, I'm going to get! Whatever I want, I have to get!
According to a recent lawsuit that was filed, P. Diddy might be a pedophile. This new lawsuit alleges that P. Diddy constantly held parties at his house that involved minors, adults who were assaulting these minors, male and female sex workers that were servicing everybody. And this lawsuit even alleges that P. Diddy himself spiked people's drinks at the party to get them looser and convince them to do whatever he wanted them to do. This lawsuit came from one of P. Diddy's former employees, a man nicknamed Little Rod. And this lawsuit is incredibly disturbing and paints a picture of Epstein-level allegations. Allegations that P. Diddy may have been involved in a trafficking ring of sorts. Allegations that P. Diddy forced his employees to go out and procure sex workers for him in his parties. Allegations that P. Diddy violently forced people to do things for him. Allegations that P. Diddy may have murdered people and admitted to it. Amongst many, many other allegations of assault, groping, and yeah, just so many different things. These are some really disturbing allegations, and while they haven't obviously been proven to be true in court yet, the team that actually put these allegations forward claims that they have hundreds of hours of video and audio evidence incriminating P. Diddy and his entire team in this string of illegal acts. I'm sure that this is going to be some really disturbing stuff. I'm going to be sure to cover this story as it unfolds more. And yeah, if this is all true, this is extremely dark and disturbing stuff, and I think that this web is going to spread very far across the music industry.
This doctor, he has one goal. He wants to be rich. Let's call him Dr. F. Dr. F's an oncologist, he specializes in treating cancer, and he's well respected, but he's not rich. And in order to get rich, one day he figures out this scheme. His scheme is that when his patients come in, he starts diagnosing them with cancer, whether they have it or not. He's like, oh, sorry, you have cancer. He then submits that info to the patient's insurance company, and the insurance company then pays him for giving the patient very expensive cancer treatment. Here's the biggest problem with that. Other than the fraud. Not only does the patient falsely believe that they're dying, but they also have to actually go through that treatment. So then you've got a completely healthy person going through chemo, and chemo can fuck you up. But Dr. F, he doesn't care. He's gonna be rich. And to his credit, his scheme works. Suddenly he's getting paid left and right. He starts telling more and more of his patients that they have cancer, and then they all start seeking treatment. So he gets even more money, and then he buys a 6,000 square foot house, and he expands his businesses. Now he has 7 locations. And then 6 years go by, and he's still running this scheme, and it is still successful. And at this point, he's convinced hundreds of his patients that they have cancer when they don't, and then he's pumping them full of chemo drugs, and he's pocketing the insurance money. And business is booming, and finally, bam, Dr. F has met his goal. He's finally rich. Until one day, this woman, Monica, she comes in to see Dr. F for something. And of course, Dr. F immediately diagnoses her with cancer when she doesn't have it. And he tells her she needs to start treatment right away. So Monica starts treatment, and after her first day of chemo, she feels like absolute shit. In fact, she feels so bad that when she goes home, she trips and falls and breaks her leg pretty badly in 2 different places. So she goes to the clinic where she would normally see Dr. F. But this time, Dr. F isn't there. He's out of town on vacation. So another doctor's there making rounds in F's place. This doctor, Dr. So. So So looks at Monica's leg, and he also starts examining the rest of her. And pretty quickly, he's like, this woman doesn't have cancer. And later, he breaks the good news to her. She's not dying. She doesn't need chemo. And he advises her to never see Dr. F again. And that whole interaction makes Dr. So suspicious. And he starts investigating, and he starts digging into all the patient's records, looking for more evidence that Dr. F is misdiagnosing people. Now, around that time, Dr. So is at the clinic having a conversation with this guy, George. George is the office manager there. And George is like, hey, Dr. So, I heard you're quitting. And So's like, yeah, I'm quitting. There's some shady stuff going on around here. So then George gets suspicious, and he starts investigating. He's checking records, he's interviewing staff, and he gathers tons of evidence. And once he looks at it all and realizes what's actually going on, he takes all this evidence to the FBI. The FBI gets the Medicare Fraud Strike Force involved. Yes, that's a real thing. And then they look into this, and they find that over the course of 6 years, Dr. F had committed $34 million in Medicare and health insurance fraud by convincing 553 people that they have cancer. So they immediately raid Dr. F's clinic and they arrest him, and he's charged with all kinds of stuff, and he gets sentenced to 45 years in prison, and he has to pay a bunch of the money back. And all this happened in Michigan, so shout out to Michigan.
This is what happened to 32-year-old mother of one, Carmen Thomas, whose case is one of the worst I've ever heard of in New Zealand. Carmen Thomas lived in the Auckland suburb of Remuera, and she was reported missing on the 13th of July 2010 when she failed to pick up her son. Soon after her disappearance, Carmen's car was found abandoned in Hamilton, which is about an hour and 20-minute drive from Auckland. Her bank accounts were untouched, and the last known sighting of her was on some grainy CCTV footage from June the 27th, which was a couple of weeks prior to her disappearance at Countdown in Green Lane. Carmen had been reported missing by her ex-partner, Brad Callahan. They shared custody of their son, Jack, who was 5 years old at the time. They'd met in England, but separated shortly after Jack's birth, and it's said that the pair parented amicably and everything was going smoothly. A massive investigation ensued, and police searched everywhere that they could think that she might have gone, but a month into the search, there was still no sign of Carmen. And at this stage, police decided to fly her mother to New Zealand from South Africa in order to make a plea to the public in the hopes that that might lead to some sort of break in the case. And then the police made a shocking announcement. They said that they now believed Carmen to be dead based on the amount of blood found in her abandoned vehicle in Hamilton. This is also when police completely shut down on the media. Up until this stage, they'd been very open and providing constant flow of information to the media and the public, but now they were entirely tight-lipped. However, a local newspaper, the New Zealand Herald, somehow managed to gather some intel on the operation. Intel that suggested that Carmen's partner, Brad, the one who had reported her missing, was now the police's sole suspect in the case. Police had found a witness of sorts, a friend of Callahan's who had provided information and evidence to the police in order to obtain immunity from prosecution. And the story that this man told police was damning. It detailed how Brad had reached out multiple times for help in disposing of Carmen's remains. Oddly, the friend never went to the police. Like, during the process, he said he refused to take part, but he didn't take any further action and actually continued to hang out with Brad after the fact, after he'd reached out to him. However, police later ascertained what they believed to be what happened the day that Carmen was killed by Brad. The story goes, and again, we only have one side of the story because poor Carmen is not here to defend herself or share her version of events. But it's said that on the evening of June 28, Carmen contacted Brad saying that she had some concerns about their son Jack. So the following morning, he went over to her house in Remuera at around 8:45. Now, exactly what transpired at this stage, we will probably never know. However, police speculate that Carmen, perhaps following a fight with Brad or, I don't know, told Brad that he was not Jack's biological father. This sent Brad into a blind rage, and he beat Carmen so severely that she died. A neighbor next door reported hearing screams and cries, and she actually went outside to check up on Carmen, and she said she witnessed Brad coming out of Carmen's house with blood on his clothes, but he just told her that Carmen was real sick and had been vomiting up blood, and he told the woman that she could come in and check on Carmen if she wanted to, but she decided, oh, she's obviously really unwell, so I'll leave her to it, and went back inside her house, which I find personally really scary because what was Brad's plan if the neighbor did decide to go in and check up on Carmen? Was he going to kill her too? Anyway, the neighbor then sent a text message to Carmen just saying, oh, I hope you're okay, and then got a reply from Carmen's phone saying that she was feeling really sick, but she was going to be okay and she was going down the line or leaving town for a wee while. Turns out that the person using Carmen's phone the entire time was Brad, and he was sending text messages to her friends and family and boss, pretending to be her so that they wouldn't be suspicious. But of course they were, because everybody who knew Carmen knew that she would never, ever, 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 ever abandon her son like that. Anyway, despite having Brad in custody and having the testimony from Brad's friends, the police still hadn't found Carmen's body. But then they made a hurried press conference announcement to say that they had located her in an area of bush in the Waitakere Ranges. And the details of the disposal of Carmen's remains are truly some of the worst I've ever heard, so I won't go into it. However, all I'll say is that he had dismembered her and placed her into various buckets filled with concrete. And remarkably, investigators were able to find her, thank goodness, so her family could hold a proper send-off. Brad was sentenced to life with a minimum non-parole period of 13 years and 8 months for murder and attempting to pervert the course of justice. Now, just to clarify for our non-New Zealand viewers, life does mean life in our justice system, and the minimum non-parole period, even if you get out on parole, you'll be on parole for the rest of your life, so you're never truly free. That being said, we are kind of famously lenient with our sentences here compared to the likes of the US, where he'd probably be in jail for the rest of his natural life. The one arguably good thing Brad did after his incarceration was he managed through the courts to get name suppression for their son Jack, and made it so details of his whereabouts, his location, his new name, his family, anything could never ever be revealed or reported on by the media. So that's one thing. Another insane thing is that at this time that Brad murdered Carmen, he had another partner who was pregnant, who stood by him even when it became apparent and he admitted to having killed Carmen. She stuck by him, which is insane. She had their son 2 weeks after his arrest. So now Callahan, who's 2 kids who are going to grow up without parents, one who is essentially orphaned. So yeah, what a great guy.
While you're here, we'll keep you busy. You'll wash for us, you'll clean for us, cook for us, you'll for us. That's your choice in a nutshell.
The woman in that video was one of the victims of serial killers Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. These two were 2 of the most depraved murderers to ever haunt America. So from the outside looking in, Leonard Lake was a totally normal guy. He was married, he went to Bible studies, attended church. But back at his remote cabin in California, Leonard Lake and Charles Ng were abducting sometimes entire families, murdering them, and keeping the women hostage for days, weeks at a time. So obviously there's a lot to this story. It's really disturbing. There were over 25 victims attributed to Leonard and Charles, and the 2 of them would literally abduct entire families. They would then kill the men and the children and keep these women hostage in a bunker on the property. Eventually though, a serious mistake by Charles led the police to the compound. And that's when they arrested both of these guys. They started digging up the grounds and they discovered the corpses of those 25 plus victims. And when they searched the home, they also found a library of videotapes. These videotapes graphically show the interactions between Leonard Lake and his victims. There are a lot of tapes. They're all on YouTube. You can go watch them. But they are incredibly disturbing. Just watching Leonard talk to the camera about his thoughts and desires, listening to the way he treats and talks to these women that he's abducted, and knowing the amount of carnage that this man and his friend caused is crazy. As a side note, Leonard Lake actually took his own life a couple days after being arrested because he had sewn cyanide pills into his clothing. So he never really was truly brought to justice.
This is one of the scariest and saddest stories that I've heard in a while. This is Ross McDonnell. He was an Irish filmmaker and Emmy-winning director and cinematographer. Ross went missing on the evening of November 4th of this year. He was last seen leaving his Brooklyn apartment riding his bike. When he didn't return home or have any contact with his friends or family, he was reported missing. Shortly after, the New York Police Department found Ross's bike locked up at Fort Tilden Beach in Queens, and it truly seemed as if he vanished into thin air. But on November 17th, police responded to a call at Breezy Point Beach, and when they arrived, they walked into a gruesome scene. There on the beach, laying in the sand, was a headless and armless torso with just its legs attached. It was very clear that the body was dismembered, and the head and arms have still not been located. Based on a distinctive birthmark and a pair of red Adidas swim trunks, the body was determined to belong to Ross, and other pieces of his clothing were also found on the beach. Although his cause of death has not yet been determined, police do not suspect any foul play. They've also stated that there is no indication of suicide. A lot of people are suspicious of these findings because Ross's body was dismembered, but according to the NYPD, they believe that Ross went for a swim that night and simply drowned. And they believe that since he was in the water for 2 weeks, he was dismembered by the strong tides, sharp rocks, and marine life. According to Ross's friends, it wasn't unusual for him to go for evening swims, so that paired with the fact that other pieces of his clothing were washed ashore has led authorities to believe he just went for a swim that night and was overtaken by the current. Of course, this is still ongoing and the police are still investigating the case, but this is extremely scary and sad for Ross and his friends and family.
Dirty diapers, lots of dirty diapers. Baby bottles with maggots in them. Right. It was bad. It was really dark, very hot.
A lot of wax built up in her ears so that we couldn't see her eardrums. She had a hard time keeping her body upright. She had to be supported.
Erica Murray is a 31-year-old woman who lived in a quaint suburban area in a Cape Cod-style home just 4 blocks away from the local police station. Erica's house seemed like every other house on the street, but what went on behind closed doors was so horrifying that it would chill the bones of even the most hardened detectives. Let's take a look at the case of the mom who left 2 of her babies and dog to
He's been at our house all day, and I just left to go to Bellingham, and he called me and said, I can't get the babies to stop crying. Well, there's kids here. There's like little babies here. They've been here all day. There's no one here. Okay, and there's no electricity. There's dirty diapers.
Erica Murray was born in Northbridge, Massachusetts, to middle-class parents Kevin and Sharon Murray. She was a happy-go-lucky kid who was loved by her parents and properly provided for. In the summers, Erica would play baseball with her 2 older brothers and soak the heat away in a neighbor's pool. Her parents would even take them to the beach when it got too hot, and they would also enjoy barbecues in the backyard. When Erica was a teenager, she began to care about her looks, always wanting to have her hair done and spent time caring for her nails. All this cost money, so Erica went to work at the local McDonald's to get a little extra money for herself. There, Erica met Raymond Rivera. Raymond was 7 years older than Erica, but something about him pulled Erica in. Almost as soon as they started dating, something began.
This is the gruesome case of Kimberly Proctor. On March 2010, 18-year-old Kimberly was lured to her friend's house. She was tortured, sexually assaulted, sodomized, and then stuffed in a freezer to die. This all happened in British Columbia, Canada, when Kimberly was new to Pacific Secondary School and she met 16-year-old Cruz Wellwood and 17-year-old Cameron Moffat. The 2 boys were best friends and they were known to be troubled teens, especially Cruz, who his father was already in jail for multiple essays and the murder of a 16-year-old girl. In February 2009, Cruz posted a blog titled "Early Warning Signs of a Serial Killer." And then he listed 14 common traits and wrote the following: "The peculiar thing is I meet all 14 criteria." Around this time, Kimberly started dating a boy named Zach, and after a few months, their relationship ended. And that's when Kimberly went to Cruz and Cameron for some comfort, but the 2 boys wanted to date her now that she was single, but she wasn't interested in being in a new relationship. The 2 boys felt rejected and lashed out at Kimberly through MSN, calling her nasty names, and even went as far as telling her that she was gonna die. But you see, what no one knew, especially Kimberly, was that Cameron and Cruz were not joking. It's been said that the boys were into very dark things. They drank blood together, they watched sadistic porn, and they fantasized about SA and bondage. So not long after, Cruz and Cameron messaged Kimberly again and asked her if she wanted to come over so that they can apologize and talk in person. While Cruz was messaging Kimberly, he was also talking to Cameron, and they spoke about all the disturbing things they were going to do to Kimberly if she agreed to meet with them. Kimberly really did see the good in everyone, so she agreed to meet, and the next morning at around 10:30 a.m., she went to Cruz's house. The 2 boys agreed that the code to attack Kimberly was to say, "I think I'm going to make some KD," which in Canada just means mac and cheese. When they tackled Kimberly, they first tied her hands and ankles with tape and then stuffed a sock in her mouth. They SA'd and beat her for hours while doing other very disturbing things to her. They then put her body in a freezer, and Cruz went on his computer to send Kimberly a message in order to build himself a cover-up story in case he was questioned by police. Later that evening, Cameron asked his ex-girlfriend to come over, possibly to do the same thing to her, but luckily she didn't fall for it.
Pay attention to the girl looking straight into the camera. To most people, Annette Craver looks like a regular teenage girl, but something isn't quite right. Her mother, Mary Rose, noticed that her daughter wasn't the same since she returned from a recent trip to California. What she doesn't know is that, while over there, her innocent daughter tied the knot with a serial killer. In 1983, 43-year-old Felix Vale, a cult leader, manipulator, and serial killer, married 17-year-old Annette Craver, putting her entire being under his control.
There was nothing in her eyes. There was no personality there. It was like a zombie.
But the teenager still had enough sense in her to try to overcome her tyrannical husband.
She said, "I'm leaving, Felix. I want a divorce. I'm going back to school."
But this was too little too late, because Annette disappeared shortly after, leaving no clues behind. Frustrated by the local police's lack of action, Mary Rose, Annette's mother, launched her own investigation, but no one expected how far she was ready to go to find her daughter and stop her son-in-law's killing spree.
And she threw out a machete, and I'm like, what in the world have I gotten myself into?
You didn't worry about the risks. I don't worry about the risk. I just wanted to know the truth.
September 8th, 1981. It was the end of the summer in Houston, Texas. 15-year-old Annette and her mother Mary were having a yard sale to sell off the last remaining items belonging to Annette's late father, who died in a car crash 2 years prior. Unbeknownst to Mary, her daughter was still struggling with the loss of her father.
This is your friend Annette, and here is your long-awaited tape. Hope you like it.
She spent a lot of time alone. She was always writing poetry and drawing, picked up the guitar.
This kind of solitude and isolation concerned Mary.
Annette, I'm sure, missed her dad more than I realized. I even asked her one time if she thought she needed to see someone to talk, and she said, "No, Mom, I'm fine."
But the truth was that, behind her mother's back, Annette made a new friend, a charming, yet much older man she met in the city. At 40 years old, Felix Vale was even older than Mary herself, so when he showed up at the yard sale, talking it up to her daughter, she didn't think of him as a potential threat.
I think I may have seen him on his motorcycle. He was just another customer.
Mary was very preoccupied at the time. Since the death of Annette's father, she simply couldn't find any work in Houston. She needed to move away to be able to provide for her daughter, but lacked the money to do so, until an opportunity arose in the neighboring state in Oklahoma. The only issue was that Annette, who had already skipped 2 grades, was about to graduate from high school, and Mary knew that moving away could compromise her progress. So she decided to leave her in the care of a friend for a few months while she temporarily left for work, a decision she'd later come to regret when she learned that the mysterious stranger she met at the yard sale was getting closer and closer to her underage daughter.
She did mention in letters that Felix stopped by, but I didn't know that there was intimacy. And then I learned that Felix made many, many visits. I regret that I left, and she even said to me in a letter, "I feel like you abandoned me."
With Mary away, Felix easily manipulated Annette and convinced her to go on a road trip with him after her graduation. Meanwhile, Mary saved money for months and was eager to announce to her daughter that she bought a house for them under both of their names. Finally, they would be able to live together again. When she learned that Annette already left, Mary was devastated.
On the morning of November 29th, Christine Young suddenly woke up out of a deep sleep feeling a cold sensation come over her. It was exactly 5:45 a.m. and she noticed that her arms and legs were starting to go numb. She thought it was strange but brushed it off in the moment, not knowing what it could have meant. After all, she needed to get some sleep so she could wake up to meet with her daughter later in the morning like they had planned for a while now. But when Christine's daughter Ashley didn't show up for their arranged meeting, she began to worry. She started frantically calling Ashley's phone but got no response. So she called each one of Ashley's friends to see if they had any idea where she was. This is when she learned that her daughter Ashley had plans to meet up with 30-year-old Jared Chance and hadn't been seen since leaving a local bar with him. A few days later, police receive a disturbing phone call from a concerned neighbor in Grand Rapids, Michigan. This neighbor explains that he's just stumbled upon a tarp with a stream of blood leaking from it. When police arrive, they find that the tarp is wrapped around a human torso. The owner of that apartment? Jared Chance. The DNA of the torso is tested and it comes back that it is human and that it does belong to Ashley Young. Ashley's arms and legs were later found in a box in Jared's apartment. That's when Ashley's mom, Christine, recalls the incident from a few days prior. She believes that at the time she woke up at exactly 5:45 in the morning was the time of her daughter Ashley's death. Unfortunately, Ashley's head has still never been located.
No, silly, to dry it. No,
but it exploded. And they were both found dead. She must have been out of her head. Here it is.
One of the most successful serial killers in history is never talked about. Let's talk about Giulia Tofana, who was said to have killed around 600 men. That is a lot of men. There is little known about Giulia's life and upbringing. No pictures, nothing. This story takes place in the Renaissance period in Italy. Back then, women didn't really have any rights. Like, at all. They were usually forced into arranged, loveless marriages. In this time, when you got married, your husband owned you. Men had full ownership and control over their wives. Husbands would often beat their wives without any consequence. And unfortunately for the women, divorce was basically non-existent at the time. It wasn't even an option. So safe to say there was a lot of women stuck in abusive and loveless marriages with no way out. That's until Giulia started her little business. Giulia created an odorless, tasteless, and colorless, undetectable poison, and she put it in makeup products. She disguised her poison in beauty products that women could easily keep on their vanity and no one would question it. She called it Aqua Tofana. Pretty cool name. This product would allow women to discreetly kill their husbands over the span of 4 days. A few drops every day, and the initial symptoms would simply seem like a flu. A few more drops the next few days, and it would slowly weaken and eventually kill the men. You're probably wondering how she got away with killing all of these men without anybody noticing. Well, Giulia was very careful. She didn't just sell Aqua Tofana to anyone. Any new client had to be verified by a past client and have a background check. Giulia's clients were actually really protective over her as well and kept her secret. This went on for over 20 years. Giulia would also coach the women on how to act around the days of the poison. After the first day, when the husband starts getting the flu symptoms, to act really concerned and call a doctor. The doctor would come and assume it was just a basic illness, give them medication, and leave. The key was that the women were the ones to call the doctor. They had to act concerned, anxious. When the husbands would eventually die, the doctors would be baffled. And the key to all this was that the women were told to demand an autopsy. But the thing about Aqua Tofana is that it was undetectable in an autopsy, meaning that all of these deaths came back as natural causes. Unfortunately, the story is too long for one video, so come back for part 2 to see what happens next.
This is one of the most sickening and disturbing cases I ever covered, and it will make any true crime fan's stomach turn. This is the case of Jennifer Dougherty. This case took place in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, which is a relatively small area. Jennifer was 30 years old and was extremely kind and sweet. She loved to dance and she trusted everyone she ever encountered. This is because she had some mental disabilities, and this disability even affected her keeping up with her peers in school. And she always got bullied and teased, but she always chose kindness over anything else. She then started going to this community center when she finally thought she met her friends. And these supposed friends were Angela, Peggy, Amber, Melvin, Ricky, and Robert. And you will soon find out why they weren't her friends. These 6 people all lived together, and Angela was 17, who was pregnant with Ricky's baby, who was 23 years old. Amber was 20, who was pregnant with Melvin Knight's baby. Peggy was 27, and Robert was 36. Now remember, Jennifer was 30 years old, but due to the mental disability she had the mental capabilities of a 12 to 14-year-old person. The 6 of them and Jennifer hung out for a while, but soon after, Angela became extremely jealous of Jennifer. This is because her boyfriend Ricky would always flirt with Jennifer when they all hung out. So Angela and Amber came up with this whole screwed up plan. On February 10th, 2010, Jennifer was invited to a sleepover with her friends. And before she left a note for her mom that said, "Have a great day at work, and I love you very much." Right when Jennifer stepped into the apartment house, she was subjected to 36 hours of extreme hell. The group went through her purse and stole money, gift cards, and her cell phone. They poured liquids into her bag, hit her head with filled soda bottles, cut her hair, painted her face with nail polish, and dumped liquids and spices on her head. They then took turns violently hitting Jennifer with a metal towel rack and crutches. Jennifer was also stripped naked, gagged, and then raped by Melvin. They even forced her to drink cooking oil, nail polish, detergent, different medications, and even urine. And keep in mind, this whole time, Jennifer completely trusted them because she thought that they were all her friends. But they were literally dehumanizing her. They then continued pouring all of these things and spices on her head, and Jennifer was crying that her eyes hurt and she couldn't see. But they didn't listen and continued pouring. And after they decided they tortured her enough, they took her life. They then tied her up in Christmas lights and forced her to write a fake suicide note, essentially saying that everything that happened to her was self-inflicted. The first line reads, "I have not been feeling happy for a while now, and I also feel everybody will be better off without me." Which is just sad because that wasn't the case. Jennifer was extremely loved. Once the note was written, they got a knife and stabbed Jennifer to death. And once they knew she was dead, they tied her up in Christmas lights again, stuffed her body inside a garbage can, and dumped it in the parking lot of a middle school, where her body would be discovered by a truck driver the next day on February 11th. Even though Angela orchestrated the whole thing, she avoided the death penalty because she was 17 and a minor. But she ended up getting life without parole. Melvin got the death sentence. Ricky was also given the death penalty, and Peggy, Amber, and Robert were given 30 to 72 years in prison. This case is just so sickening and disturbing, and it stuck with me after I read it, and I feel extremely bad for Jennifer and her family. I wish nothing but the worst for those 6 people who did this to Jennifer.
Have you ever heard of the Burger Chef murders? On November 17th of 1978, a little bit after midnight, so around 12:30, an off-duty Burger Chef employee came to the restaurant. He found all of the doors opened, including the back door that was usually blocked off with a metal bar. That was open as well, and the metal bar was ajar. When he went into the restaurant, he noticed that all of the cash register drawers were open and all of the cash was taken out, but none of the employees that were supposed to be on duty that night were there. This employee then called the manager, who called police. Jane Freet, and I probably said her name wrong, correct me down in the comments, but she was 20 years old and she was the manager on duty that night. Ruth Shelton was one of the employees and she was 17. Mark Flemons was 17 and Daniel Davis was 16 years old, and all of them had just disappeared. When police first arrived, they noticed that Jane's car was missing, so they just assumed that the kids had taken the money and gone off on like this joyride. They ignored the fact that both Jane and Ruth's purses were still on the location, and most of the time you won't go out without your purse, or you won't leave your personal belongings there if you're just going out on a joyride. So at first, police did not take this case very seriously. That was until a couple of days later, on November 19th, that a person walking their dog stumbled upon 2 dead bodies. These were the bodies of Ruth and Daniel. Now, both of them had been shot multiple times. This was the cause of death. Jane's body was the next to be found. It was found about 75 yards away from Ruth and Daniel, and she had been stabbed multiple times, and she was stabbed so viciously that the knife blade was still inside of her body. The handle had broken off during the attack. Mark was the last one to be found, and he was found about 150 yards away from Jane's body. He was lying on his back near a tree, and the coroner decided that he died from asphyxiation. There was almost no leads in this case. It seems like it was just a completely dead end from the very beginning. Since they didn't take this case seriously from the get-go, they didn't do any they didn't look for any fingerprints in the restaurant. They didn't look for anything in the restaurant, so all of it was contaminated from the very beginning. Police were able to find a witness that said that they saw 2 men hanging out behind the Burger Chef the night of the crimes. One was a bushy-haired man, or like he had a lot of facial hair. The other was clean-shaven, and apparently the witness said that these 2 men asked for identification and then told them to get out of there because there had been a lot of vandalism going on in that area. Police in later years, like in 2018, think that they do think they know who committed these murders, because around this time there was a group of people that were robbing burger chefs all over around in this area. And most of the time what they would do is they would hang out in the alleys behind the burger chef, like these two men were doing, and then jump unsuspecting employee who was taking out the trash, and then make entrance into the restaurant, take all the money, and then leave. But they had never physically hurt anybody. Like, they did damage, obviously, by these robberies, but they had never physically hurt anybody. Most of the people that were implicated in this crime of the robberies have since passed, but there was one person that did come forward to police and say that they did believe that their group of people might have been involved, but they stopped short of confessing to anything. And police refused to release these names. At least I couldn't find anything that released the names, and I probably didn't dig enough, but I couldn't find anything that released the names of the suspects. But police believe that these two men made entrance into this burger chef, and then one of the employees recognized them from another restaurant, and this caused them to murder all of them. This entire case is absolutely tragic, but the police's theory on what happened to Mark is absolutely heartbreaking. Police believe that both Mark and Jane got away and ran off, and they caught up with Jane first, and Mark was getting away before he ran smack dab into a tree, knocking himself out, making him fall on his back, and he asphyxiated on his own blood. To think that he was so scared and running so hard, like, that just absolutely breaks my heart. The entire case is heartbreaking, and I can't imagine what these kids went through. But that to me is just devastating. But police believe that had he not ran into this tree, that he would still be alive to tell them what happened and possibly bring these people justice. But it's really seeming like this case might go completely unsolved. But police are hoping that with new technology, they'll be able to bring these people to justice. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Like the video, it helps me out, and follow for more true crime.
This mysterious case absolutely does not sit right with me. Someone knows something and has not come forward. On the 12th of July 2015, 18-year-old Tiffany and her parents attended a graduation party in New Jersey. At around 9 p.m, one of Tiffany's friends spoke to her parents and claimed that they were really annoyed because Tiffany had used their debit card without permission. Tiffany initially denied this to her friend, but then did admit this to her mum Diane a little bit later. At this point, they were all outside Tiffany's house, and Diane went inside to find her husband. When she returned outside of the house, Tiffany had vanished. Now, they were able to see Tiffany on the deer cameras that they had outside the house. She appears to be walking down the driveway in her normal clothing and white headband. When they tried to find Tiffany, they actually made a terrifying discovery. Her phone was lying on the floor at the bottom of the driveway. Immediately, they knew something was wrong, as Tiffany never had her phone out of her sight. At 11:30 p.m, her family called the police. Little did they know, 27 minutes earlier, Tiffany had been hit by a train. Frustratingly, pretty much straight away, police presumed this death to be a self-unaliving. However, that just didn't seem to fit with the evidence presented. All of Tiffany's family and friends said how much of an upbeat person she was and that she was really happy at the time. She was making plans for the future, and the autopsy also showed that she had a clean toxicology report. Now, in the deer cam footage, she was fully clothed, but when she was found, she was just in her underwear with no shoes on. Upsettingly, 2 weeks after her death, Tiffany's mum actually found her missing trainers and headband more than a mile away from the tracks. Could someone have murdered Tiffany and then dumped her body on the train tracks to make it look like she did this herself? Tiffany's parents certainly think so. They definitely suspect some foul play was involved.
This boy suffered a botched circumcision and was raised as a girl for 13 years. In 1965, David Reimer was born a boy along with his brother in Winnipeg, Canada. But at 8 months, he suffered a botched circumcision, and unfortunately, his genitals were accidentally burnt off. While his twin brother was fine, David's damage could not be fixed. So David's parents consulted with Dr. John Money, and he suggested that David undergo sex reassignment surgery and be given hormones and instead be raised as a girl. His parents took the advice and changed David's birth name from Bruce to Brenda. Dr. Money believed that David could be easily raised as a girl despite being born as a biological male. The doctor even told David's parents to never tell him or his twin brother what happened to him as a baby. As the twins got older, Dr. Money continued to see them for annual checkups, but it's been said that during these appointments, he would make them rehearse sexual acts as he photographed them. Throughout David's childhood, he rejected anything feminine and consistently showed masculine traits. By the time he reached 13 years old, he was suicidal and his mom realized that he wasn't happy being a girl. Soon after, David's father finally told him the truth and immediately he changed his name from Brenda to David. David then began taking testosterone and going through various operations to rebuild his genitals. But he continued to suffer from psychological trauma throughout his life due to Dr. Money's experiment, and not long after, his twin brother passed away. And sadly, at the age of 38, David committed suicide. A lot of people blame Dr. Money for David's death, but his defense is that it was the right thing to do at the time.
Who's that? He was my coach, mentor, I consider him, and literature teacher in high school. And he's the nephew to Bill Beardsley, who's just running for governor. Okay, I was wondering if there was a connection with Husson College. He did his college thesis on Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah. He taught a class on Tolkien. I took a class on Tolkien. I love Lord of the Rings. Silmarillion, The Hobbit. The Hobbit's my favorite book.
Thane shows us a bit of his scholarly side here.
I'm like, yeah, I don't get it.
You watch that?
Yeah.
Steve?
Well, it wasn't my choice. It was a matter of DHHS or DHS, Department of Health and Human Services.
He claims that he was allegedly abused by his mother, which resulted in him being removed from her care at age 12 and into his uncle's home until he was 17. It's possible that Thane is exaggerating or even fabricating his history of alleged abuse as a ploy for sympathy. The detectives touch on high school and how that ended for Thane. This may be a sore subject, considering his inflated view of his high level of intelligence.
Now you graduated in 08?
That was the class of 08.
Yeah. And you graduated from Ellsworth High School?
I didn't graduate.
Oh, you didn't graduate? Okay. What happened there?
That's a long story, too.
We got plenty of time. You got plenty of time and coffee and even candy bars if you want one.
No. Okay. Senior year rolls around. I've got my car and my license and almost all of my credits.
You've likely noticed by now that Thane's word usage is atypical. Because he didn't finish high school, perhaps Thane is trying to make up for it by using a higher level vocabulary to appear as smart or smarter than the detectives.
Ellsworth was a school system that changed their systems, treated us like guinea pigs, and treated us like we were in prison cells.
If what Thane is saying has any truth to it, you'd think he'd make every effort possible to avoid ending up in a prison cell. Bear in mind, though it's not always the case, a troubled childhood can lead to legal issues later on in life.
You know, I started partying. That was my whole party phase. It pretty much started and ended at 17. Really. He did some stupid stuff.
What was the stupidest thing you ever did?
Stupid.
Even if you didn't get caught.
And what had happened is, I turned myself in. I found out the police were looking for me. I said, okay. I walked right in and said, hi, my name's Thane Ormsby, and I'm here to turn myself in.
What'd you get for punishment?
Probation.
Promise not to do it again.
Basically, yeah. Well, I mean, I was underage, and it was my first offense. A week later, I come back to double check with him.
Then, there's the question about the bike.
When was the bike ride when you were up the driveway? Because we found bike prints up there. That's why when I asked you the other day if you had a bike, you said no. Today I asked you if you had a bike, you said no. Yeah. Now I'm confused. Why didn't you tell me you had a bike when I asked you?
Why didn't I tell you I had a bike? Because
we saw bike prints there.
I heard stories about biker gangs, and I didn't want to be confused with...
No, I asked you the other day, pedal bike.
Yeah. Pedal bike, okay. Pedal bike. Yeah, I have a pedal bike.
Right. Go get him his coffee. No, good. Hey, buddy. Huh? Thane, I want you to know that I'm here for you the best I can be. I cannot make you any promises about the media. I can't make you any promises about that. That's way over my head. I will go to bat for you. I mean, I will stand up for you about what you tell me in here.
Today's case is one of these cases that you'll most likely recognise like the famous mugshot from. So this here is 18-year-old Shailene Moran. At the time of what she did, she was 18 years old, and this takes place in 2019. She was from a place called Pawtucket, which is in America, and in the fall of October 2019, she met a boy online who she started a relationship with. This boy was called Leonard Trowfield, and I couldn't find any photos of him for some reason. On the first day that they met in person, the pair stayed at Leonard's house. However, after day 4, the pair got into quite the argument, where Shailene had stormed out of the house and filed a police report against Leonard. And she had called assault, which Leonard absolutely denied was not true. The pair were then given a no-contact order. And the reason why I'm kind of leaning to believe Leonard is, I'll tell you why. So obviously when you're given a no-contact order, you cannot contact that person. But this didn't bother Shailene. She was sending death threats to absolutely all of his family, including his dog. So after the breakup, she then very quickly met Jack Doherty. And together they had conspired that they were going to kill Shailene's ex. And Jack was absolutely down for that. He was so ready to do it. They were sending each other texts like, if you do this, we'll be together forever, I love you, and all that. And at the end of December 2019, so we're literally talking 2 months later, Jack came down from New York to see Shailene. Not only this, he also brought an engagement ring with him, and the pair were ready to go to her ex's house to commit a shooting. So Shailene had actually stayed in a hotel nearby where the pair were staying. She didn't go with him, and they decided that they were just going to shoot whoever opened the door. So on January 1st, 2020, Jack Doherty went to the address of Leonard, and it was his mother, Cheryl Smith, that opened the door, and she was shot several times, which killed her. Another strange thing that I just want to know, I couldn't find many photos of Cheryl either. To which, after it took place, they then posted this on Facebook, which says, "We some fighters and some shooters." And she's also showing off her engagement ring in the post. Luckily, a detective that was responding to the shooting had saw this post that these two had posted. So literally just a couple hours later, they were arrested in the hotel room, which I just think is kind of funny, to be honest. Like, how stupid do you have to be? And the cops found the gun that was used in the shooting that matched the bullets found in Cheryl. Jack Doherty is still in prison awaiting trial, but because Shailene was really the mastermind behind it, she knew what she was doing. She was sentenced to life in prison for her part on killing Cheryl Smith.
These sisters had a competition to see who could sleep with their dad first. This is Samantha Kirshner, and in 2018 she met her father. She was 17 at the time and always wanted her father in her life. She even met her half-sister and formed a close relationship with her. By September of 2018, Samantha and her half-sister were battling for attention from her dad in the most unexpected ways. That's when they decided to have a competition to see who could sleep with their father first. On September 10th, Samantha slept with her father for the first time, and in the following month, they ended up getting married. Samantha's mom was clueless about the marriage, and she ended up notifying the police that Samantha's father had inappropriately touched her. Samantha ended up admitting to police that her and her father had a sexual relationship, but they did not believe that they were actually related to each other. Police then asked Samantha on why she would even do this, with the possibility of this actually being her father, and she stated it was because she had a jealous competition with her half-sister. DNA tests later confirmed that that was actually her biological father. Police then arrested Samantha and her father, Travis Fieldgrove. In 2019, Travis was sentenced to 2 years in prison after pleading no contest in incest charges. Travis stated his actions embarrassed him and he deeply regrets sleeping with his daughter. His lawyer stated that he had a brain injury and was not a high-functioning person. In June of 2019, Samantha got a 9 months probation and served a 22-day sentence.
When I looked at that picture, I thought, wow, he looks like a great dad. I was wrong. On August 7, 2021, Abby Coleman was packing up for her family to go on a camping trip. Unbeknownst to her, her husband, Matthew, had already loaded up the kids into the car and left. He left Abby at home. She looked outside the window and was like, did he really just leave with the kids? She phoned him, texted him, nothing. Abby was frustrated and confused. But at that moment, Abby didn't see Matthew as a threat to her kids or to himself, and she actually thought he'd eventually return home. No official missing report was filed. At 8 p.m. that same day, Matthew checks himself and the kids into a hotel in Rosarito. By the following day, Abby was extremely worried, as she should have been. She woke up to her family not back yet. It wasn't like Matthew to be gone that long. And then she thought it wasn't like him to do any of this at all. Still unable to contact her husband, she phones the police. An officer came by the family's home and took an official report. The officer suggested trying to locate Matthew through the Find My iPhone locator app, which is an app where you could find a specific iPhone. She did as the officer said, and she located him. She saw that he was in Rosarito, Mexico. With the missing persons now believed to be in Rosarito, Mexico, the case was handed over to the FBI. The next day, a ranch worker, along with his dog, discovered 2 bodies on his ranch. They were children. This is a graphic description, please be advised. The children's bodies were covered with puncture wounds, at least a dozen on each of them. Authorities said the weapon was believed to have been a sharp wooden stake, which was found at the scene. The 2 children were Kaleo, 2 years old, and Arga, 10 months old. They were Matthew and Abby's children. Hours later, Matthew was intercepted back at the border, attempting to cross back to the United States. He was arrested by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agents. Matthew admitted to the brutal killing of his 2 children, where he referenced conspiracy theories from the Illuminati. He told authorities that killing his children was the only course of action that would save the world because his wife possessed serpent DNA, and she had passed it on to the children. I don't know what to say about that. Matthew Taylor Coleman was charged with 2 counts of 4 and first-degree murder. His trial date has not been released. Rest in peace, you 2 beautiful kids.
3 dead bodies were found stuffed into this hollowed-out tree in the middle of the woods in 2010. And when it came to who the murderer was, truth is stranger than fiction. This is Matthew Hoffman, and in November of 2010, he murdered 3 people and kidnapped a 13-year-old girl who he held hostage for days. On November 9th, 2010, Matthew went into the woods and spent the night camping. Then the next morning, on November 10th, he decided to wake up and break into the home of Tina Herman. So, unfortunately that day, when Tina Herman returned to her house, Matthew Hoffman had broken in. And as soon as he saw her, he freaked out, dragged her into a bedroom, and stabbed her multiple times with a hunting knife, killing her. But what Matthew didn't know was that Tina's friend Stephanie was coming over to meet her that morning. And while Matthew was dealing with Tina and her dead body, Stephanie entered the residence. Matthew freaked out. He stabbed Stephanie a number of times with the same hunting knife, even continuing to stab her after she was dead. And hearing all of this, the family's dog started to bark violently, and Matthew then stabbed and killed the family dog as well. After this, he dragged both of the women's bodies into the bathroom, dismembered them in the tub along with the body of the dog, and stuffed the body parts into trash bags. Shortly after finishing the dismemberment process, though, Tina's 2 children, Cody and Sarah, arrived home from school. Immediately after walking into their house, Matthew stabbed Cody in the back of the head, killing him instantly, then chased Sarah up into her room where he bound and gagged her with a cord from a fan in her room. So after dismembering Cody's body and stuffing him into a trash bag as well, Matthew brought out the 3 bodies that he had chopped up and placed into garbage bags, stored them in his car, and then brought out Sarah, who was still alive. After this, he brought Sarah and the bodies of Tina, Stephanie, and Cody back to his own house, where he kept Tina locked in a crawl space. And this is where the story gets really weird. So Matthew Hoffman was a self-professed tree lover, and his entire home was covered in leaves. I'm talking about piles of leaves, bags of leaves nailed to the walls. And apparently, according to his neighbors at the time, Matthew had exhibited some really strange behavior prior to the murders. He had apparently been trapping squirrels in his backyard, killing them and grilling them. He allegedly spent hours sitting up in the trees in his backyard, just staring at the other trees and watching squirrels. And for a while, he had actually worked as a professional tree trimmer. But let's get back to the story. So after bringing Sarah back to his house, along with the bodies of the other people he had killed, he locked her in a bathroom and even tied himself to her and took a nap. Afterwards, he headed back to the crime scene, did some cleanup, and then eventually brought Sarah into a crawl space, which was once again covered in leaves, dark and damp. And while she was chained up and held hostage inside of this crawl space, for days he visited her regularly and would SA her. Keep in mind, at the time, Sarah was only 13 years old, and her mom, her brother, and her family friend had been murdered right in front of her. Finally, though, a few days later, Matthew was arrested after police found him parked in his own car right next to the abandoned car of one of his victims. Tina, Coda, Sarah, and Stephanie had been missing for days now, so the police obviously went and searched Matthew's house, and that's when they made the gruesome discovery of Sarah chained up in the crawl space. This is an actual photo that the police released eventually of Sarah exactly as they found her. They actually had to take these photos for evidence before they released her, and they obviously immediately arrested Matthew. So for a while after his arrest, Matthew would not release the location of the bodies to the police. They were desperately trying to find the bodies of those people that he had killed, but he wouldn't tell them anything. That is, until they took the death penalty off the table, and that's when he revealed that he had stuffed the 3 corpses into a hollowed out tree in the middle of the woods. Police immediately then went and found the tree, and inside they found the bodies of Cody, Stephanie, and Tina in those trash bags, dismembered. Eventually, the tree was torn down, but how bizarre is this story? Eventually, Matthew Hoffman was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and this whole story is just kind of mind-blowing. He's been nicknamed the Leaf Killer for doing the things that he did, for his obsession with leaves, the way that he placed the bodies inside of a hollowed-out tree trunk. I've never really heard a story like this, and I hope to never hear one like this again.
This man is the most dangerous prisoner in the world. You won't believe what he did. A couple had just bought a brand new house that they moved into to start a new chapter in their lives. However, the first night that they moved into the house, they began to hear noises in the basement. The couple then decided to check the basement. When they got down to the basement, they saw this scary man immediately. They called the cops, describing what he looked like. They described him as over 6 foot tall and looked like a monster while on the phone with the police. The phone mysteriously hung up. The couple then began to scream for their lives, but you never believe what he did to them.
Police have released an image of a teenager they want to speak to over a stabbing that left a man in hospital. Elvis Price, 18, is wanted in connection with the incident which happened in Berry Road on the 10th of March at around 11:45 a.m., along with a younger boy. The victim, a man in his 30s, remains in Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, where his condition is described as stable. Officers from Norfolk Police are carrying out extensive inquiries to locate Price and have released an image of him to ask for the public's help. He is described as around 6 foot tall, of skinny build, with short, dark hair. When he was last seen, he was wearing blue jeans, a green long-sleeve top, a black gilet, and black and white Nike trainers. He is known to have links to parts of Essex, Kent, and Cambridgeshire. Price is thought to be with a younger boy who is also wanted, but police have not released his details because of his age.
Imagine being held captive in a basement, and when police arrive, you think you're free. You call out for help, but they leave you there to be killed. In the 1980s, girls in Belgium started vanishing. The local community in Brussels was understandably unsettled. They had no idea a monster was living among them. Marc Dutroux was reportedly abused as a child. When he became an adult, he turned to a life of crime. He was involved in substance dealing and selling stolen cars. He married early and had 2 sons, but he had many affairs and started abusing his wife. They separated and he married his second wife, Michelle Martin. The pair would go on to do the unthinkable. In 1985, the couple had a disturbing hobby. They would kidnap and women. A friend of the couple called Jean also helped them. Marc had managed to convince him that he owed him a favour. On June the 7th, 1985, they took their first victim. This was 11-year-old Sylvie D, who had been walking home. Men jumped out of the car and grabbed her and kidnapped her, and when they got her home, they AR'd her. They took a Polaroid picture of her before setting her free. They took many more victims before eventually being caught by police. The girls that were set free went to police and provided them with information to make the arrest. Mark, Michelle, and Jean were imprisoned for a short time. Mark, however, managed to manipulate the prison officials into thinking he was disabled, so he got many benefits. He was also able to state that he couldn't sleep and got prescribed some sleeping tablets, which he would go on to use for a sinister purpose. Mark was released in 1992 after serving just 3 years in prison. This time he learned a lesson: to set no more of his victims free. He built a dungeon in his basement for his next victims. Between 95 and 96, he would kidnap at least 6 children. He kept them in his basement, tortured them and SA'd them, and used the sleeping tablets to sedate them. It was at this point that...
This is Peter Scully, one of the worst pedophiles in world history. I'm about to tell you his story, but seriously guys, this one is incredibly disturbing. It's so dark, and viewer discretion is really advised for this video. So Peter Scully, he's still alive. He was from Australia, he had a family there, but he was engaging in criminal activities, and he eventually fled the country and moved to the Philippines. And this is where the darkness really began. While he was in Australia, Peter Scully started up an international child sex abuse ring. The things that were done to these kids are, I mean, I can't even talk about them here on TikTok, but he also started up a pay-per-view video service. And with these videos, he was producing CP, but one of the most extreme forms of CP that can possibly be produced. So how did all this happen? Well, when he was out living in the Philippines, Peter Scully had 2 Filipina girlfriends. They would go out to the streets, they would find kids that needed money or looked impoverished, they would bring them back to the house they shared with Peter, and the things that went on afterwards are literally unspeakable. Remember, like I mentioned before, Peter was the head of an international ring of people that enjoyed the abuse of kids, and he provided videos for these clients. But his most infamous video was titled Daisy's Destruction. This video that he produced was so extreme, so hardcore, that people on the internet, when they heard about what happened in the video, literally thought that it was an urban legend, and they thought that there was no way this could be real. This is an actual screenshot of the beginning of the video. This is a screenshot from the very beginning of the video. In the video, 3 young girls are repeatedly tortured for hours and hours on end by Peter Scully and his 2 girlfriends from the Philippines. They are beaten, they are sexually abused. I mean, I can't even describe, like I said on TikTok, some of the things that happened in this video. And 18-month-old Daisy. Now keep in mind that all of this was on camera. That's the most disturbing part of this. One of Peter's victims actually ended up dying. They were buried in his house. And this sick individual literally sold that video footage across the world. And what's even more disturbing is that there were lots of people willing to pay to see that video. I'm not kidding. People were paying $10,000 to view this video. That is absolute insanity that there are people that sick out there in the world. And this is only the beginning of the crimes that this guy carried out. Some of the other stuff that we're going to touch on is absolutely disgusting. It's just horrific. And the story of how Peter Scully was eventually identified and arrested is extremely captivating. I'm going to run out of time here on this video, but if you want to see a part 2, let me know below. This story is far from over.